Yalimada, Naguib and Julie, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on this Thinking Ahead series. This programme really seeks to explore some of the key themes that could be front of mind for members of the Jamaat as we emerge from the lockdown and look to the future and look to think about what life looks like over the next few months and years. So today, the theme really is about civil society and specifically the potential and to some degree the responsibility that we all have to contribute to the societies in which we live. So I'd like to start by unpacking this term, civil society. Many of us will have heard it be used by Maulana Hazar Imam in various different contexts. He's talked about building civil society. He talks about developing a stronger civil society. And in his guidance, he often encourages us to contribute to civil society. Naguib, how do you understand this term?
Well, I think about it as really organizations that are doing things for the benefit of society at large and not government and not businesses. So everything else, charities, schools, universities, hospices, political parties, all manner of organizations that are somehow engaging in our lives but are not our business or our central government.
That's really helpful, thank you. I think we often use these terms with just having a vague understanding of what they mean. So thank you for that clarity. Julie, turning to you, in one of our early conversations, you referred to this philosophy or this principle of Ubuntu, which has underpinned a lot of your work. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that. In particular, what does it mean? And how has it shaped your journey when we think about how Naguib has just defined civil society and civil society organizations?
So Ubuntu is a Zulu word, and very basically it means love, it means kindness, it means compassion. It's basically the golden rule, love thy neighbor. And I think it's very close to our ethic of service. And I can give you an example if you want of what Ubuntu means. The example I would give you is of an anthropologist who was in South Africa. She was studying the Zulu tribes and she was working with some children. And before she was leaving, she thought she would do an experiment. So what she did was she took a basket, you know, a wicker basket, and you have to imagine that what she did was she put some cookies and sweets inside there. And then what she did was she took that basket under a tree and she left it there. And then she went to these little Zulu children and she said, okay, the first one of you who runs off and goes under the tree and gets the basket, so I'm going to give you a race, will be the winner, and you will take the basket and what's in the basket. And so what she did was she drew a line on the grass about 100 meters away from the tree, and she said, on your marks, get set, go. And what happened was that all the children, instead of running, what they first did was they held hands, and then they walked to the basket. And once they got to the basket, they put the basket in the middle, they sat down, so you have to imagine their legs were coming towards the basket, and they shared the chocolates and the cookies, etc. And then the anthropologist said, well, why did you do that? One of you could have been the winner, and you would have taken all. And the little girl said, well, if I take everything, then everybody else is sad. This way, everybody enjoys the cookies and the chocolates, and we're all happy. So that's Ubuntu.
Julie, I love that story. I think it's brilliant. Yeah. It really does speak to this, you know, this idea of not having one winner and we're all part of one wider community. Nikki, what are your motivations underpinning a lot of the work you do?
Well, I think it's a mixture of things. And, you know, some of it is just, it's what I grew up with. And so it's what I think is completely normal. So in my family for generations, they've always been in voluntary service, both in the Jamaat and outside the Jamaat. And you know, I grew up with my dad being active in the Lions Club and the Rotary Club and the Drama Society, as well as doing things in the Jamaat. He was a scout master. And so there was always this feeling in our household that you got involved in things, both in the Jamaat then externally. And so I didn't really know anything different. So I don't know that I thought about motivation when I was at school and I was 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 and started doing charitable things with school. It was just what you did. And then as I learned more, and I learned about what the teachings were of our faith, you can read it in the Quran or see it in the Hadith or in the Farmans of the Imams about the ethic of generosity and service and helping those less fortunate. There was a whole strand of motivation that says, well, this is really, if you have faith, then this is part of enacting your faith. But I think the other thing that you find in motivation is an enormous satisfaction in seeing how you can make things better for other people. And it really makes you feel like you have a purpose and you have an impact. And if you can see the beneficiaries actually deriving the impact, you get great satisfaction from it.
I'd like to add to, something to that, because neuroscience shows that if you're kind, you have dopamine and serotonin that we emit. So it's a very beautiful natural drug, and kindness begets kindness. It's beautiful, the virtuous karmic circle.
Absolutely. And I think it's amazing that neuroscience, which is relatively recent, if we think about our history of 1400 years, I think it's amazing that neuroscience really confirms something which we know to be true inherently, which is when you do something good, it feels good, it feels natural. Yeah. So listening to both of you talk, I'm thinking, is this kind of contribution to civil society organizations, is this something anyone can get involved in? If I think about members of the Jamaat that may be wanting to get involved, but perhaps unsure how, Naguib, let's start with you. What advice can you offer?
Well, I think everybody can contribute. It's just a question of figuring out what's right for each individual, and what's right for me won't be right for Julie or for you, and vice versa. And I think really you have to do things that you're interested in, that you're passionate about, that you think you can make a contribution in. And for some people, that's very practical, hands-on things. And for other people, it's much more writing or analyzing or doing accounts or doing something technological. It's all different strokes for different folks. But I think everybody can get involved. You can help the homeless person down your street by giving them a hot drink, or you can end up on the board of an enormous charity helping them with their strategy. I think everybody can do something. It depends what you're interested in and who you come across in your day-to-day life. I mean, all voluntary organizations are desperately short of people. So if you go and volunteer somewhere, you'll always find that there is a hospice or a charity or a school where they're short of people. If you have kids in school, schools are always short of people willing to serve on the PTA or on the governing body of the school. So I think there's lots of opportunities. You just have to figure out what fits for you and what you're interested in.
Mm-hmm. And how have you found the journey? So, you know, in terms of starting and then moving and kind of potentially growing that role, the roles that you may have held?
Well, I think, like I was saying in the beginning, I don't know that I consciously started doing this stuff. It just happened. And maybe if you put that energy out there that you have an appetite, people reciprocate. So, you know, when we were talking about dopamine and kindness begets kindness, I think if somebody senses you're willing to help, then they ask you for your help. And I mean, that's really been my experience over the years, that I've got asked to do things or volunteered to do things, and you either decide to kind of grab those opportunities and run with them, or you don't. And if you do and you contribute, then people notice that you're contributing, and then somebody else says, oh, well, I worked with this person in something else and they really helped a lot, or they were really good to work with, and they invite you to do something else. And, you know, one thing leads to another.
Absolutely. This one thing leads to another is a very, I think, yeah, it holds true for me personally as well. Julie, any perspectives from you in terms of practical steps people can take, or what we can learn from your journey?
My journey started with bakes at school, sponsored runs for the RSPCA, but definitely our community. And going back to my Ubuntu word in the beginning, and also the ethics that you mentioned, Naguib, I love what we have as our motto as volunteers, which is work, no words. Beautiful.
And can you tell me a bit more, Julie, about what it is about that motto that speaks to you?
Work, no words is about doing something for the greater good. It's an energy that is not just for me, it is for the greater good. And I feel that that speaks to my work, both for the community and professionally. I don't see there's a difference.
I think what Julie's saying is really important about how there are so many opportunities in our own community through our voluntary activities that socialize people to doing voluntary work. And actually what's quite interesting is when you do things outside the community, you find that you learn so much by what you did in our own system that's applicable somewhere else. And in fact, in many cases, people have an interest in us because of what we've learned and done in our own institutions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Naguib, can you give any examples from your experiences around where that might have happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was approached to go on what's effectively the board of Oxford University Press, I asked the people who were interviewing me why they were interested in me, because I'm a Cambridge alum and I'd no connection with Oxford. And I thought, well, you must have tons of people who have Oxford connections who you could have do this role. And actually one of the things they said is, look, we see that you've been involved in educational institutions for a really long time. So yes, you're a banker and a commercial person, but you've got 25 years of experience of working with higher education institutions. So you're clearly interested in higher education, and you've done a lot of work in developing countries, and all of our growth is in developing countries. So we thought you were a really interesting candidate. And actually most of that, the academic institution experience and a lot of the developing country experience, came from my work with the AKDN and Jamati institutions.
Very interesting to think about the interplay and how we serve both within and outside the community. And I'm wondering if I can dig into that a little bit more with both of you. Julie, perhaps your perspective. You've also served at very senior roles within the community and within the international institutions. And I'm wondering was there mutual benefit? Was there a trade-off? What was the thought process there in terms of how you chose to spend your time or roles to take up?
So, as I said, I start from my purpose, which is the ethic of love, of Ubuntu. And the way I function is there's no difference in the way I service professionally, whether I'm paid or if I'm not paid. I do see, just like Naguib, that there's great mutual benefit, that whatever I've learned in the community, and some of the work we've done has been amazing. We were just saying offline when we were coming on board, we were talking about lifelong learning and some of the projects we did on the Ismaili as it was then, the internet, to where we are today with the Ismaili TV, what we're preparing for. I mean, these things started 25 years ago. So you've got a toolbox, a golden toolbox, which is invisible on your back. And you can take what you've learned in the community to outside, because we impact millions. And actually you think, oh, well, this is just the community. And then you go outside and you think, well, they don't have the experience. And then you learn something from outside and you cross-pollinate back inside. It's brilliant.
But I think what you're saying is absolutely right, Julie. And it's not just between community service in external organizations and community service in the Jamaat. It's also between our professional lives. So if I think about every single thing I've done in a voluntary capacity, whether it's in the Jamaat or outside of the Jamaat, has somehow fed through into some benefit or learning that's been applicable in my banking career. And I do think it's not the reason why I got involved in doing things in civil society, but I do think it helped me tremendously in my career that I was seen as a banker who did a lot of service for the community. So I was perceived differently to other bankers. And I knew people in government because of the work I was doing in the voluntary sector. And, you know, these things are all mutually reinforcing. It's a very small world, but you'd be amazed how the skills that you learn in voluntary organizations are applicable in your professional business career and vice versa.
Plus, to reinforce that, I would say, and maybe you've had the experience also, Alia, and it speaks to what you said, Naguib, is that you get a chance to experiment, to innovate in a safe environment. And that gives you confidence to be able to be a different type of leader, maybe outside, and vice versa.
I'd like to just also push in a little bit more on this idea of choices. And I mean, you've both also clearly said that opportunities present themselves, opportunities will come, and you've given some examples of this as well. And I'm just reflecting on conversations or peers of mine that have said, you know, not having the time to serve, thinking about when is the right time to commit to take on a voluntary role. You know, and I'm just thinking about this. You're talking a lot about there being the mutual benefit and the mutually reinforcing. Where have you made decisions around taking on roles or not taking on roles because you've got too much else on, or where you've prioritized certain things over others? Can you share a bit of your thoughts on that?
Maybe I'll start. Very simple. What I will talk about in my mind, or I'll think about, is what's my passion? Does the role meet also my ethic? Does it meet impact? Does it have a ripple effect? Very simple.
And with you, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think this thing of I'm too busy, I don't have time is something that you can either have that approach and you'll have that approach for all your life, or you can say, I'm going to reprioritize how I use my time. And I found that the more busy you get, the more efficient you are. And it's like, you know, if you're one of these prevaricators like me, I always do everything at the last minute. So when it's really back against the wall, I can write really fast. So I can churn out stuff really quickly, which would take me days if I didn't have deadline. So I think when you have lots of deadlines or you have lots of things that you have to do, you just get quicker and you get more efficient. And yeah, you make some trade-offs. You know, you maybe have a little bit less leisure time, or you sometimes see your family a bit less because you're busy doing stuff in the evenings or traveling or whatever it is. But I think those are all trade-offs that you have to make in life. And I think that in the past, employers were much less interested in their employees spending their time in civil society endeavors. I think that's changing now. And it's not just changing in terms of civil society endeavors, but things like, you know, 30 years ago, I think in a bank, I would have been embarrassed to say, I want to take the afternoon off to go to my son's school play. But actually today, that's perfectly acceptable. And it's good that it's acceptable. But I think likewise, businesses are understanding that they're not just about profit and not just about the shareholder, that they have to care about broader societal and stakeholder interests. So they're willing to support people spending some time in their business day doing things that are for community benefit. So I think there are opportunities, but you have to make choices. So I made a choice 10 years ago to give up my full-time job because I just couldn't manage the demands of a big executive job and all of the various charitable things I was doing. So I decided to go part-time in business and be able to dedicate more of my time to charitable work. I mean, that's just a choice that you make. Not everybody has the luxury of that choice. I had the luxury of that choice and I chose it. Sometimes you do things and you find, well, they're not really providing the impact. Julie was talking about impact earlier, and that being a motivation. I was on the board of NHS England for about 18 months, and I found that it was taking about 5 days a month to be contributing to that board. And I just didn't think that the difference I made for that 5 days was as much as I could do in other organizations. And so I resigned off the board.
I think that's a really useful example, and thank you for sharing it, because I think when we think about voluntary service and voluntary contributions, sometimes we don't have as much of a focus on the impact we're making and is this the best way I could be spending my time. So really useful to get that example. Naguib, thank you so much. Julie, do you have anything to add on this in terms of maybe decisions or choices you might have made that didn't pan out the way you wanted them to?
Not really. What I would just say, which is slightly at a tangent, is to say that it's very important to deal with self-care. So you're not going to be able to juggle a lot of balls if you don't have a very good system of self-care. So let me explain that. Maybe Naguib, you can explain what you do for self-care. But self-care, what I mean is a grounding. Because if you're not grounded, you're going to get burnt out. So it's very important to have the grounding. And I think we have that within our faith. I particularly do it through meditation in the morning. And that does give me the grounding so that I don't, because the world is a bit crazy and I want to have an impact. And if I'm not very grounded, I'm going to get very, very busy and I'm going to get very burnt out and I won't be very effective. So I do think when you go out in the world, whether you're doing it professionally or you're doing voluntary service, it's very, very important to be grounded. And I think we have that in our faith. And I think just to go back to our faith, we are guided to have a balance between din and dunya. That I think is quite important as a cornerstone. I don't know, Naguib, if you want to share some of the things or practices if that speaks to you and whether you have any practices.
Yeah, I mean, I think balance is the key word there. So, you can't work all the time. So you need a balance of, some leisure, some family time, some exercise, plenty of sleep. Some people like running, some people like sitting on the beach. It's just whatever makes it for you, really.
I think that's a really important point, Julie. And I think this idea of self-care and balance, particularly if I look at the last 2 to 3 months and how families may have been somehow turned upside down by the lockdown in terms of the way that people would have balanced previously and now are having to grapple with that self-care and finding the space and the time for it. And when I reflect on this current context that we find ourselves in, and again, linking back to this sort of the voluntary contributions that we're talking about, we've seen an enormous outpouring of that support and volunteering kind of coming forward from members of the public, perhaps in a way, their own way to be self-caring by caring for others in some respects in this period. And I'm keen to get your thoughts. We've seen this increase over the last 2 to 3 months in terms of this willingness to connect, this desire to support the vulnerable. Nikki, do you see this continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to pick up on what you said at the beginning there about people's self-reflection during lockdown. And I think we've probably all got things that we've individually thought about and said, I'm going to do this differently going forward. And I'm sure there's a lot of that. And certainly on my part, I'm clear that I don't want to travel as much on business as I was traveling, and I want to try and do more of my meetings by video conference and cut down the travel. I've missed the business travel at all, to be honest. But I think the other thing about that sort of ability that we've had during the lockdown, maybe it's because people haven't had commute time to work. They've reclaimed a big chunk of time. And many people have found there's time in the morning to do exercise or read or have some period of self-reflection or pray more, whatever it is that people have done. And I do think people will go back to that. And I think also that people have had to think about what's important and how important community is, how important essential workers are, how we need to appreciate people who give care in homes and those kinds of jobs. So I think probably there will be people who want to contribute back into society because they've seen how important those things are.
It's very hopeful, Nagi. I hope it does sustain beyond this immediate period. Julie, what are your thoughts on how the pandemic has impacted our willingness to serve or to provide voluntary service?
Oh, I think that Nagib has really well summarised it. You know, we're all seeing people coming out of their homes. I think you do it in the UK. I'm based in Belgium. On, is it Thursday where everyone's clapping? And it's not just that. It's helping people with their shopping and going to the pharmacy. And when people have lost jobs, very quickly finding jobs for them, caring. It's just amazing. So it's been a horrible experience in one respect because you see horrible headlines, and yet on the other hand, how beautiful. We've seen compassion.
And as we emerge, I think we'll see, you know, new needs or different needs where voluntary service or civil society organisations can have impact. And I think, you know, you may be aware of some of the headlines around the resilience within the charity sector or within civil society organisations. What are your thoughts on if and how we can contribute to that resilience and building that resilience?
Well, I think it's about making sure that we are integrated into the society in which we're living in. So when we have a choice about spending time doing something in a voluntary capacity, making sure we think about the broader community, you know, the guidance in the Quran, in the Hadith, and the Farmans of the Imams don't say just help Ismailis or just help Muslims. It's a general message about helping fellow human beings. And so I think if you go back to the Farmans and you say, why has Hazrat Imam talked about this such a lot? And it's interesting, if you go back, it's not a recent thing. This goes back decades that he's been talking about contributing to broader society. And it's the same if you look back at what the previous Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah, talked about a lot in terms of being engaged in civil society. There's a very important reason for it. If you look at our history as a minority community, we've been a minority for the last 1400 years. And if you look at the history, our community has been forcibly ejected out of different countries at different points in time. And one of the ways to help protect yourself against that is to be better integrated into the broader society in which you live. So if people see you as contributors and being engaged and being part of the fabric of the things they know and love, they don't see you so much as the other. And I do think there was a disturbing increase in the trend of nationalism pre-COVID. I think that COVID has accelerated that. So people have put up borders. People are fighting against globalization. You see all the anti-China rhetoric today. And so I think going forward, coming out of this pandemic, that sense of being integrated into the broader community will be even more important than it was before.
Very, very good point. And just to bring it down to a very personal level, Naguib, I'm wondering from your perspective, how has your religious identity impacted some of the roles that you've had or the work you've been able to do?
It's impacted it quite a lot. I mean, partly because I'm very public about what I spend a lot of my time doing. So, you know, when I started doing a lot in terms of voluntary work and people knew I was taking time out of my day job, they would ask me what I was doing and were interested in it. So I've always been very open about my faith and my community and what I spend time doing. But I think in some cases, I've been asked to do things because I'm Muslim or because I'm Asian, and they've wanted a Muslim spokesperson on a panel, or they've wanted an Asian person. And so they've approached me and said, would you participate in this event or this seminar? So it has affected the things that I've done in a very positive way.
That's really interesting. And I think particularly thinking about the current time when there's a lot of discussion around diversity and inclusion, we can contribute simply by being part of a team or being part of a board, in addition to the specific skills we might bring. I wonder, Julie, you've done a lot of work in this area, particularly speaking to females in leadership positions. Any perspective to share from your experience?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know whether you remember, Naguib, but a very long time ago, we were invited by, I think it was the government. There was a whole bunch of people who are from top business or from the business world who were invited to speak to the government. And I think from there, they were able to find people, ethnic minorities or people from BAME backgrounds to work on boards. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you were there, and there was a very long time ago, so our paths crossed there. But definitely, I don't think I've actually been ever invited to be part of a board because of my religion or from my background. But I'm just like Naguib. I don't hide it. I'm an ambassador, and I'm very proud of our community. And it's quite interesting because they then get to know about our community, and as we said earlier. Some of the things that we've worked on, which have such impact, we're able to share that to people with people outside.
Absolutely, I think this ambassadorial role that people can play when taking on these positions outside the community can be quite powerful to the community at large, not just for the individual themselves. So as a sort of closing question, I guess, as we look to 2040 and with reference to Hazra Imam's recent messages inviting us to build well and to think about how we might position ourselves, our families, the community for stability, how can we ensure that this ethic of service that we've been discussing today, that you both clearly talked about being rooted in the work that you do, how can we ensure that it continues to be integral to our efforts, to our decisions, to our choices? Julie, what are your thoughts there?
I look and I go back to the forest, and I look at trees, for example. Trees, the example of trees, they look as if they're separate, and they're very strong and they're rooted. You use the word root. They also give shade from the leaves. But if you look underneath the trees, you can see they're interlocked like this. So I think it's very, very important what we've been discussing about civil society, that we continue this work of working across civil society and cross-pollinating, because for resilience, you do need to being isolated does not work. We're going through a revolution, and within that word is the word evolution. And I would say, I mean, of course, Naguib, you'll have your view on this, but I think that what we'll come across is issues of rebuilding, and Hazra Imam has used that word. He's also used the word hope, which are very strong words, but it'll be about people, our humanity. And we've talked about altruism, compassion, and we've seen beautiful examples of compassion and leadership where in countries that are doing very well regarding COVID. And also, I think that the structures we have within the Jamaat, well, maybe Naguib will talk about that, but also outside, are structures that we've had from the 1940s after the Second World War. They are not now appropriate for what we are going through now. If within 3 months those structures don't work, we're going to have to work together to find a new way of working. And the way to do that, to use the word you used earlier, diversity and pluralism, which is the word Hazrat Imam uses, that's how you do the decision making and the decision, and how you come to the creation of the new structures. Because we don't have in our drawer, we don't know how to do this. So we have to work not in isolation, but there is opportunity.
And I love this idea of how, you know, you talk about new structures being needed, and this sort of, I guess I've got an image now of you sort of doing this, and this need for this kind of network, kind of intertwined approach. And I think perhaps within our community, there's a real need for us to think about how we can develop that and how we can build that in a resilient and in a strong way, because the crises are going to keep happening. Naguib, from your perspective, how can we ensure this ethic of service, you know, continues to be integral to our thinking?
Well, I think if you look at what we're going through right now, one of the things that you take away from it is we're in the kind of world of the unknown. So as science has advanced and society's advanced and people have harnessed technology and people begin to think they know about a lot, this is a reminder that we don't know about a lot too. We have absolutely no idea how we're going to deal with this virus, what its consequences will be, etc., etc. And it sort of brings me back to thinking about one of Hazrat Imam's firmans from the 60s that was about the danger when man forgets that he's not the creator and that God is the creator. And we don't know a lot. And what our Imam tells us is to focus on education and learning and lifelong learning. And he said to us repeatedly that learning isn't just about school and the classroom and university, it's a lifetime of learning through many different avenues. And I think that being involved in different civil society organizations is all part of our learning process. So you do get to hear other opinions and learn about different things through your exposure to other organizations. And when he's talked about building stronger institutions in our own Jamaat, we make our institutions stronger by being better informed, and we're better informed by seeing how people do things elsewhere and learning from them. So I think there's a lot to take away from what we're experiencing today, and the pointers are all in his firman. So all we have to do is listen hard and see how we can then follow through.
Absolutely, I think that's a great point to end on, actually. And I should thank you both. This has been a remarkable lesson for me, certainly, and I hope that for the Jamaati members that are viewing, in how to keep service really at the heart of our thinking, particularly pertinent now as we look to the future, as we look to what the next few months and years and so on will bring. There's a number of takeaways that are going to stick with me. This philosophy of Ubuntu, Julie, that you've discussed today, and how it speaks to this idea of one humanity. We have this principle of one Jamaat, but this is sort of making it that much broader and looking at it on a much more kind of broad scale. This idea of impact as well, and thinking about how we can use our time to have the greatest impact for others that we're supporting and that we're looking to help in whatever best way we can. But the one thing that does stick with me really is actually the way you've both seemed to have embedded this ethic of service within what you do. It's not an additional role that's stuck on a Wednesday night or a Saturday afternoon, but it kind of feeds through and it's kind of seeped into all roles that you've held, and it's well and truly intertwined. And I think I can't help thinking that, you know, as this lockdown seems to have accelerated the need for employers to think about flexibility in the workplace, perhaps this is an opportunity for us all to think about, following your examples, how can we embed that in our day-to-day kind of ways of working, ways of life as we go forward. So thank you for bringing that to the fore. Lots of food for thought, certainly for me, and thank you both for sharing examples and your stories and your learnings as you've gone on your journeys. I look forward to a time when we can connect in person. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.